All right, good morning. Today we're going to tackle actually two pieces in this lesson. They're both rather short. They're excerpts of great, leaders of this time period. We're still looking in the, late 19th century, mid to late 19th century. We're going to look at the Gettysburg Address today. We're going to read the whole thing on here, give you some little tips on some interesting literary things that happened in there, and then also a letter that Robert E. Lee wrote to his son. So we'll get both sides of that struggle. The letter from Robert E. Lee to his son, particularly, I had never read before I got to teach this class, and I found it to be quite interesting. Um, Hopefully, you will as well. So let's talk about our main literary concept we're dealing with today, which is going to be diction. Diction is just word choice. Anytime you're delivering any kind of persuasive, any kind of persuasive delivery, be it a speech or an essay or anything, just a person-to-person discussion, diction matters. It matters a lot about what words you use. If you haven't noticed, this has become more important than ever as people consistently will use very charged words, very loaded words to try to get their point across, and often by doing so, they harm their argument more than they help it. So there's a lot of things you have to think about when you sit down to deliver a speech, like the Gettysburg Address, which was addressed for a specific purpose, but had a deeper purpose too. So Lincoln had to think about longer-term implications, as well as what Robert E. Lee sent to his son, which was intended to be just for him, but still. The words each of them use impact how they're remembered in history. So it's really important. So it's just an everyday thing to think about. The words we use matter. Even if you use a word that you feel like has the exact same meaning as something else, the connotation that goes with these words, the cultural ideas that are attached to these words are what make them have meaning. And you can complain and whine all you want about how, well, I didn't mean that when I said it, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. Use a word with strong negative connotations, expect a negative response. You can't assume readers or listeners are going to understand what you meant by that word, okay? So always be careful about the word choice you use. All right, so let's look at this very famous speech by Abraham Lincoln. It's not very long. It's much shorter than I expected it to be honest with you, when I first started studying these a while back. So follow along in your book. We're on page 539. Next to that portrait there of Abraham Lincoln, very famous appearance there. All right, let's look at the Gettysburg Address. Let's get the background first. I'm assuming you guys know this, but let's deliver it anyway. It says the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, fought in July of 1863, was an important Union victory and marked a turning point in the war. More than 51,000 soldiers were injured in the battle. On November 19th of 1863, while the war still raged on, a military cemetery on the battlefield was dedicated. Unsure of President Lincoln's availability, the dedication organizers slated him as a secondary speaker, addressing him to make only a few appropriate remarks. In drafting that brief address, Lincoln wanted to lead the 15,000 American citizens attending the dedication through an emotional final rite of passage. He also needed to gain continuing support for a bloody conflict that was far from over. Notice those last two sentences in your background. That's why we read it. It talks about what he's doing. So his word choice here isn't just to honor the dead, which, you remember, everyone dead here is, and I don't know about. Okay, let me back up. Most of the people here were American citizens. All right, they were almost all Americans. Sorry, I'm having some issues with my screen. I'm trying to clean that up before I move on. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so this isn't like there's a foreign invader and then us. These are all us. So it's a really humbling thing. So he's trying to be be appropriate for that, but also there's a bit of propaganda attached to it to try to continue this support for a war that the North is now just finally starting to get the handle of, and he wants people to stay in it and to protect the Union. So really a lot on these three paragraphs we're looking at, a lot of pressure, okay? And I just think so much can be conveyed in such a small area when you pay attention to diction. Okay, it says 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So right away, diction, he's using some stuff from the Declaration of Independence. He uses the word liberty, a lot of things that are attached with the American ideal, something that both sides thought they were fighting for, and he's going to make sure that he tries to own that. says, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. So there's the first part of what he's trying to do. The somber, let's remember what happened here. Let's dedicate this land to these people. It's a fitting tribute. Very short, but it's fitting. Okay, but now we go to the second half, and it's the biggest part of the speech. This next part takes up more than what we've just read. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggle here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Now, I'm not done yet, but let's just talk about this first section. All right, he points out that everything we do here has no meaning compared to what these people did. There is an underlying current there. There's something that these words convey, that if they were to give up, then these losses would be in vain. And that's one of the things he's trying to convey. It's also ironic that he says people won't remember this when, this is one of the most famous speeches in American history. It's definitely in the top 5. So, he didn't realize the impact, or maybe he did. He's a politician. He may have known. Okay, but we're laying the groundwork for it. We don't want these deaths to be in vain, so we have to keep going. It says, it is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. And there's the direct statement. Notice he uses the word nobly advanced. Okay? What else? What else does he have in there? Unfinished work. So all of these terms he carefully crafts to get the main point here. But guys, I'm going to be pessimistic. Nothing against Abraham Lincoln or politicians, but in all honesty, the consecrating the ground is secondary to generating support to continue the war, and that's really the purpose here. All right. It says, it is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. Again, wording, last full measure of devotion. He's putting, the sacrifice these people made, and he's magnifying it greatly to indicate if you are for giving up on the war or surrendering or allowing the South to continue with its behavior, then you're letting these people die in vain, and nobody wants to be called guilty of that. It says that this nation, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from this earth. So, again, a very drumming up support kind of ending there. Simple, not that complex. He hits his 2 points very simply, but it also really is, it hits people. Again, it's a word choice that matters, okay? It's why so many arguments don't work in our world today. It's why so many politicians are seen as, great or not so great, and a lot of it deals with the words they use and how they use them. This is why it's so important for you to learn how to do it properly, okay? Now, let's flip over to 541. Let's look at another great example here. Honestly, a lot more, this part here seems much better written, although the Gettysburg Address isn't poorly written by any stretch. But what Robert E. Lee wrote here to his son also extremely valuable, and gives you some insight into how he thought. Remember, this was not an address to a group of people. Lee's purpose in the letter was really just to convey how he was feeling to his son and to explain why he was going to do what he did. This wasn't aimed at convincing anyone else. So, letters typically you can look at as a little more truthful. You don't have to read as much into them because, honestly, when we look at the Gettysburg Address, we know Lincoln's got ulterior motives, but this doesn't. And guys, I'm going to be honest with you, reading this made me feel differently about Robert E. Lee. It's no question, anyone who's been in my class knows I have no sympathy for the Confederacy, and consider the people that were part of it to be traitors. But, Robert E. Lee definitely presents himself here as a man with a struggle, and that makes him more real, and it makes me have a lot more sympathy for him. Still not for most of them, but for this guy, I maybe can see a little more into the struggle he went into. And I realize it's not as simple as it's portrayed in my mind, but I live in a part of the country that seems way too interested in patting the Confederacy on the back for its foul behavior. So, seeing this is really powerful, okay? All right, so now we're on 541. So we're going to look at Letter to His Son by Robert E. Lee. This one's dated January 23rd of 1861. So we're, I'm not sure exactly. I don't have a background here, but I would imagine this is a little bit before the war begins. But let's look and see. It says, I received Everett's Life of Washington, which you sent me, and enjoyed its perusal. How his spirit would be grieved could he see the wreck of his mighty labors. Okay, again, we're looking at diction still. Look at how Lee presents the situation. Wreck of Washington's mighty labors. He's not excited about it. He uses the term wreck. The term wreck definitely has a lot of connotation. So I will not, however, permit myself to believe until all ground of hope is gone that the fruit of his noble deeds will be destroyed and that his precious advice and virtuous example will so soon be forgotten by his countrymen. Again, look at the wording used there that really, puts Washington on this high pedestal and points to the importance of the country as it's been established. Lee is a man in conflict here. He's not a man who's running off to, cause a war and try to make his own country. That's not what his purpose is. As far as I can judge by the papers, we are between a state of anarchy and civil war. May God avert both of these evils from us. I fear that mankind will not for years be sufficiently Christianized to bear the absence of restraint and force. Now notice again the way he is not interested in either of the two, what it looked like was going to happen, anarchy or civil war. He feels like both of them are a bad idea, and he prays that that is not the case. And he also points out that people aren't sufficiently Christianized to bear the absence of restraint and force. In other words, we can't govern ourselves. We're too barbaric in a lot of ways. And we still are, by the way. We still haven't managed to make it there yet. One day, maybe. He says, I see that 4 states have declared themselves out of the Union. 4 more will apparently follow their example. Then, if the border states are brought into the Gulf of Revolution, one half of the country will be arrayed against the other. I must try and be patient and await the end, for I can do nothing to hasten or retard it. So notice again, his language here is not one of, he's not being inflammatory. This isn't a speech to rile up his, the Southerners to, do what they were choosing to do. He actually disagrees with it. Since the South, in my opinion, has been aggrieved by the acts of the North, as you say, I feel the aggression and am willing to take every proper step to redress. Now notice the wording there, proper step to redress. That's very legal terms. It's very, and it doesn't lean to let's burn things, let's destroy things, let's make our own country. There's no language in there that says that. He does agree that the South, is getting unfairly treated by the North, which I could have agreed with too. But he doesn't think they're going in the right direction. He says, it is the principle I contend for, not individual or private benefit. As an American citizen, I take great pride in my country, her prosperity and institutions, and would defend any state if her rights were invaded. But I can anticipate no greater calamity for the country than a dissolution of the Union. So, he's playing both sides a little bit. He's trying not to make either side look guilty. He's not portraying the secessionists as evil people. He's not portraying the North as evil people. He is saying this situation is bad, and the best thing is for the Union to stay together. But he also realizes that there's this issue of the Southern states feeling like their rights are being attacked. Says, it would be an accumulation of all the evils we complain of, and I am willing to sacrifice everything but honor for its preservation. I hope, therefore, that all constitutional means will be exhausted before there is a resort to force. So he's saying, I don't want what I think is going to happen. He says, we really need to exhaust every avenue before. Secession is nothing but revolution. The framers of our Constitution never exhausted so much labor, wisdom, and forbearance in its formation, surrounded it with so many guards and securities if it was intended to be broken by every member of the Confederacy at will. Look at that. Now that maybe is so far into the letter, the most powerfully charged set of wording. I mean, he's pointing out how wrong secession is. He's like, everything in the Constitution is built against this occurring, okay? So, don't get in your head that Robert E. Lee was, as soon as he heard that the North was going to, prevent slavery in certain states, that he ran to get his guns. It seems like he had a lot more sense than most of us do, and in that he was, trying his best to keep everything together because he knew the danger. And of course, remember, this was also, you're looking at not even 100 years since the country was founded, so it's not quite got the the strength it does behind it today is we still see people, wanting to run off and form their own countries these days. All right, he said, let me find my spot again. It was intended for a perpetual union, so expressed in the preamble, and for the establishment of a government, not a compact, which can only be dissolved by revolution or the consent of all the people in convention assembled. It is idle to talk of secession. So he points out that, honestly, that this is meant to be for good. This was not a marriage for temporary times or marriage of convenience. It was meant to be perpetual. He says that it only could be overthrown by a true revolution, not, some angry people, an actual, like, what we saw in 1776, where you had a significant portion of the people with legitimate gripes. He says, or it has to be by the consent of in a political arena where, enough people come together and say, no, this won't work. He says anarchy would have been established and not a government by Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, and other patriots of the Revolution. Still, a union that can only be maintained by swords and bayonets, and in which strife and civil war are to take the place of brotherly love and kindness, has no charm for me. So he's pointing out, and this is where he's kind of justifying with himself. He's like, of course, that being said, if the only way we're going to keep ourselves together is by force and by draconian measures, I'm not okay with that either. Says, I shall mourn my country and the welfare and progress of mankind. Notice he says that the dissolution of the Union at this point is major steps backwards. Okay, and again, if this was to be shared with other people, you can see Robert E. Lee's heart is not to do what happened historically, and he knew what was going to happen. I mean, I don't think he knew for a fact they were going to lose, but he knew that win or lose, this was going to be a blow to the bright spot that our country had taken, that had inspired so many other countries to look for democracy and freedom, and by doing this, we proved that we were flawed in some way. If the union is dissolved and the government disrupted, I shall return to my native state and share the miseries of my people, and save in defense will draw my sword on none. Look at that last part. He says, if the union is dissolved, I'll return to my native state, which was Virginia, and I will stay there and share in the miseries of my people, and unless it's in defense, I will not attack anyone. Now, I'm not sure that stayed, but the fact is that Robert E. Lee was not interested in what a lot of people think he was all for. Again, we can see, differences in diction between this and the Gettysburg Address, because the Gettysburg Address was necessarily a persuasive document, while this isn't. This is much more of Lee just trying to put his heart out there for his son to understand how he feels about this. Now, I don't know about Robert E. Lee's son. I don't know whether he was trying to, gauge his dad on whether he, wanted him to be part of the secessionists or wanted him to be, remain as a supporter of the Union. Not sure, but I do know that the wording here is powerful, and you can see a man whose heart is just grieved by what's happening in his country at the time, and might have a lot to say about what's happening in ours today too, to be honest with you. So, really powerful pieces, short, to the point, not a lot to them, but definitely filled with some interesting points to make. Now, let me look real quick. Give me just a couple seconds to look like an idiot as I glance at our questions and see if there's anything I specifically missed. We talked about diction, talked about purpose. Okay, the term ethos. I talk about Lincoln and Lee both leaning on ethos. Ethos basically, and I've mentioned this in class, but just kind of as a quick heads up, ethos is really about authority of the writer. So when Lincoln starts quoting the Declaration of Independence, that's the ethos he's leaning on. When Lee starts referencing General Washington and President Washington, though, that again is the ethos that he's leaning on. This is an important part of writing, that you have that. This is why I feel the way I do, and that you have this strong anchor point, and they both have that. The rest of these I think you can do with either through looking for yourself and just thinking, because that's the goal. The goal here is not just to write down what you hear me say. I don't want that to be this class. I want this class to be about you thinking. So the rest of these I think you can definitely get. I'm very interested in your response to the last question under Letter to His Son, which is, how do you think each of these men would define the American dream? How important was it to both of them? Do you think they were as different as history presented, or do you think they have more in common than we realize? and of course, what lesson can this teach us for our current day situations? All right, I really want you to think about that when we're looking at questions that are going to be a little bit longer. That one definitely is going to should have a lot of meat. All right, guys. Well, with that being said, this is a good closing point. I hope you guys have a great. I'm filming this on a Monday. I'm delivering this to my juniors on a Monday. This may be viewed future years on a different day, but regardless of that, I hope you guys have a great day, whatever day you're watching this or that I'm teaching it. And I hope that you're staying safe. I hope you're staying warm. I know it's a little chilly and rainy outside today, so I hope you're all doing well. So have a great night. Next time we're back together, I think we're going to be tackling something that I'm really not comfortable. I don't know enough about, to be honest. I got to do some work between today and tomorrow, but that's on some of the Mark Twain, some of his writing that I'm not familiar with, to be honest with you. I like Mark Twain. I like a lot of his stuff. I don't know much about the celebrated jumping frog or whatever that is. That's a story I've never read. So I wanted to study it because Mark Twain is essential, and I'm not making you guys read Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer. So this is our way to kind of get this guy in. As far as characters in this time period, he is perhaps the dominant literary figure of this period we're in. So definitely got to study him. All right, guys. Well, take care. Have a great day, and we'll be back tomorrow for some Mark Twain.